My name is Emily Carter, and I serve as an Army officer. I have been trained to deal with emergencies, make decisions under pressure, and protect those who cannot protect themselves. But I never thought that one day the fight would not be on a battlefield overseas, but inside my own childhood home, against my own parents, and for the life of my grandfather. I loved my grandfather more than anyone else in the world. He was the steady hand that taught me to ride a bike, the quiet voice that told me to keep my head up when life knocked me down, and the man who sent me letters during my deployments when everyone else seemed too busy. He was strong, proud, and stubborn in the way only old soldiers can be. And yet, when he got sick, instead of letting me help, my parents shut the doors, pulled the curtains, and acted like nothing was happening. When I first heard he was ill, I thought it was a misunderstanding. But the truth was far darker. They told relatives he was resting, that doctors would do more harm than good, and that it was better for him to stay home. But I knew those words were excuses. I could feel it in my gut. Something was very wrong. I never imagined I would have to confront my own mother and father, the people who raised me, and tell them they could not decide this alone. I never imagined they would stand between me and the man who raised us all. But that is exactly what happened. And once I realized they were determined to keep him hidden, I made a choice. If they wanted to fight me on this, they would. But I was going to save him, no matter what it took. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking coffee at my kitchen table. My cousin Ryan's voice was tight, almost shaky, when he said, "Emily, do you know how sick Grandpa is?" I froze because the way he asked it told me I was about to hear something I wasn't supposed to know. He went on quickly, as if he slowed down. He might not get the words out. "He looks bad, Emily. He's barely eating. He's lost at least 20 pounds. The cough is deep. Not the kind you shake off. I tried to visit yesterday, but your parents wouldn't let me in. They said he was resting, but something's not right." I gripped my mug so hard it felt like it might crack. Resting. That word made my stomach twist. I called my parents immediately. My dad picked up, his voice steady, almost too steady. "Everything's fine, Emily. He's just old. That's all." I pressed him for more. "Dad, Ryan says he's coughing badly. Not eating. What's going on?" There was a long pause before he answered flatly. "Doctors can't stop the clock. He's fine here." My chest burned. That wasn't an answer. My mom cut in from the background, her tone sharp like she was swatting a fly. "We've got it handled. Grandpa is staying home. No hospitals." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What do you mean, no hospitals? He needs care. He needs to see a doctor." But they were united. Dad repeated, "We've decided. He stays here." The words landed like a lock, clicking into place. I argued, but the harder I pushed, the calmer they became, like they had rehearsed it. My mom even laughed, not kindly, just cold. "You're off doing your army work. You don't see him every day. You don't understand reality. He's too weak to be dragged around." The way she said army work made my blood boil. Like my years of service meant nothing. Like I was a stranger, not their daughter. When the call ended, I sat in silence with my phone still in my hand. Anger, confusion, and fear all tangled inside me. I pictured Grandpa sitting alone in that dark house, curtains drawn, his chest heaving as he coughed, while the two people who should protect him pretended everything was fine. I knew then this wasn't about care. It was about control. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They weren't protecting him. They were hiding him. And if I didn't do something fast, the man who had never once given up on me would be left to waste away behind a locked door. That realization turned my shock into fury. My parents had drawn a line. Now I had to decide how far I was willing to go to cross it. I went straight to the metal box I keep tucked in my closet, the one where I store my most important papers. My hands shook as I sorted through folders of military records, deployment orders, and certificates. Near the bottom, I found a worn manila folder with my grandfather's handwriting across the tab. My throat tightened before I even opened it. On top was the notarized medical proxy form. His name, Robert Hall, was signed in his familiar blocky letters, the same way he used to label tools in his garage. Next to his name was mine, legally authorizing me to make decisions for him if he couldn't speak for himself. The stamp and notary seal glared back at me like proof that I wasn't imagining any of this. He had chosen me. He trusted me to step in when others might falter. I sat down at the kitchen table and laid the papers flat. For a moment, I just stared, torn between pride and dread. Part of me felt honored, but another part wondered how I was supposed to carry such weight when it meant defying my parents. I had faced hard choices in the army, but this was different. This was family. Beneath the form was a folded letter. The paper was lined, the ink a little faded, but the handwriting was strong. My chest ached before I even started reading. Emily, it began, if the time comes when I cannot speak for myself, I want you to be my voice. You have the spine and the sense to stand tall, even if it means standing against people you love. I blinked hard, the words blurring as tears stung my eyes. I read on. Family is supposed to protect each other, but sometimes love gets twisted into control. If that happens, I know you will see through it. Do not let anyone convince you that giving up is the same as caring. You've been trained to fight battles, but some of the hardest ones will not be in uniform. They will be at your doorstep. I pressed the paper to the table, my palm trembling, as if the letter itself carried his heartbeat. Memories rushed in. Grandpa is teaching me to cast a fishing line on the lake. His calloused hands steadied my bike as I wobbled down the driveway. His voice on the phone during deployments, telling me to keep my head clear and my courage steady. He had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. And now, even sick and frail, he was still guiding me. I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of his trust sink in. It scared me, but it also lit something inside me. I realized this wasn't just about saving him from an illness. It was about protecting the man who had spent his entire life protecting me. It was about honoring the promise I didn't know I had made until I read his words. The fear I felt toward confronting my parents slowly shifted into resolve. They could call me dramatic, accuse me of overstepping, or try to block me at the door. None of that mattered anymore. Grandpa had given me his voice, and I wasn't going to let it be silenced. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the folder, but not before running my fingers across the last line. Do not wait for someone else to do the right thing. If it falls to you, then do it. My jaw tightened as I closed the box. The doubt that had been gnawing at me was gone. I knew what I had to do, and nothing was going to stop me. The letter stayed on the table long after I closed the box. My pulse slowed as my mind shifted into a mode I knew well. This was no longer only a family crisis. It was a mission. The Army had drilled into me the importance of preparation, coordination, and timing. If my parents wanted to make this a battle, then I was going to treat it like one. I pulled out a legal pad and began a checklist. Confirm authority with paperwork. Secure medical support. Arrange safe transport. Control the environment. My pen scratched across the page with the same rhythm I had used during field briefings. Each line steadied me, turning fear into focus. The first call I made was to Sergeant Daniel Morales. We had served together overseas, and I knew he ran with the medical transport team back on base. When he picked up, his voice carried the same calm I remembered from convoys through hostile zones. Morales here. I didn't waste time. I need help. My grandfather is sick. My parents are blocking care. I have legal authority, but I need a transport team to make it happen. There was silence on the other end, then a slow exhale. Send me the paperwork, he said. If it's valid, we'll move him. I scanned the proxy form, the VA card, and my own leave authorization, then emailed it within minutes. His reply came just as fast. We'll schedule Thursday, 1600 hours. Dress blues, bring originals. We'll make it official. My shoulders loosened, just slightly. Step 1 was secure. Next, I called the VA hospital. The operator connected me to Dr. Patel, a physician I had met at a veterans fundraiser. When I explained the situation, her tone sharpened with urgency. Bring him in. If he's losing weight and coughing like that, it could be pneumonia, cardiac issues, or worse. Waiting is not an option. She promised to prep a room and a team. Hearing her words felt like oxygen in my lungs. Finally, someone was speaking the language of action instead of excuses. I spent the next day assembling everything into a red folder: original documents, duplicate copies, and even a one-page summary of authority and medical necessity. Each page was aligned like a gear laid out before deployment. I polished my uniform until it looked like armor. This wasn't about vanity, it was about presence. No one argued with a soldier in full dress blues standing at their door with paperwork in hand. That night, I ran scenarios through my head. Parents are refusing to open the door, neighbors watching, arguments escalating. I wrote countermeasures beside each possibility. If they blocked access, I'd request a welfare check. If they tried to delay, I'd call in the advocate Dr. Patel had arranged. Every angle had to be covered. Calm wasn't just confidence. Calm was control. Before bed, I read Grandpa's letter one more time. His words about courage carried me through the silence of the house. I folded the paper neatly, slid it back into the folder, and placed the folder on top of my uniform. Tomorrow would not be easy. But tomorrow, the truth would step out of the shadows, and I was ready to lead it there. The siren wasn't loud or frantic. It was steady, measured, the kind that turned heads before fading into silence. The military ambulance rolled to a stop in front of the house I grew up in, its white paint reflecting the late afternoon light. The gold crest of the Army Medical Corps gleamed on the door, and for a moment, the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Two medics stepped out first, crisp uniforms pressed, their faces calm but watchful. Morales followed, clipboard tucked under his arm, giving me a short nod as I adjusted my cap and gloves. My shoes hit the pavement in slow, deliberate steps. I could feel the weight of eyes on me from porches and windows. Neighbors stood still, unsure of what they were witnessing. My parents were already on the porch, the screen door half open. My mother's hand gripped the frame, her eyes narrowing, as if she could stop the whole operation by sheer will. "Emily, what do you think you're doing?" Her voice carried across the lawn, sharp enough to sting. My father hovered behind her, his face tight with anger, but he let her speak first. I kept my voice even. "I'm here to take Grandpa for medical care. I am his medical proxy. You've both been notified." The words felt like a blade slicing the tension in the air. My mother snapped back, "No, he stays here, he's fine." She tried to close the door, but Morales stepped forward, placing the clipboard between the frame and the wood, not touching her, just creating a barrier she couldn't ignore. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this is a lawful transfer for medical evaluation. The paperwork is valid." My father stepped out then, his voice rising. "You can't just barge in here. He's our responsibility." I pulled the red folder from under my arm and held up the proxy form and VA card side by side. "You're wrong. He gave me authority, and I'm using it." Their faces hardened, but for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker. Neighbors shifted closer, some pulling out their phones, others whispering. The whole block was watching. My pulse was steady, my training holding me upright. This was the moment to make it clear. I looked straight at my parents and said, "This isn't optional. Keeping him here without treatment stops today." The words hung heavy in the air. A hush rippled through the crowd, broken only by the faint hum of the ambulance engine. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her chest rising and falling fast. My father clenched his fists but didn't move forward. For once, they were the ones on the defensive. I could feel the power shift, not because I wanted to embarrass them, but because the truth had finally stepped onto the porch with me. Every uniform beside me, every neighbor standing witness, made it impossible for them to hide anymore. Morales glanced at me, waiting for the signal. I nodded once. The operation had begun, and nothing they said now would stop it. The air inside the house was heavy, stale, and filled with the faint metallic scent of sickness. Curtains were drawn tight, letting in only slivers of light. I led the medics down the hallway, their gurney folded in half, and wheels squeaking softly against the floor. My mother's voice rose behind us, sharp and frantic, but Morales kept her occupied at the doorway with calm words and the firm edge of authority. Grandpa sat slumped in his recliner, a thin plaid blanket over his lap. His shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered, his frame reduced by weeks of neglect. But when he turned his head and saw me, his eyes lit with the same steady spark I had known all my life. "Emily!" he rasped. The sound, weak but unmistakable. I knelt by his chair, gripping his hand gently. "Hi, Grandpa. I'm here to take you to the hospital. We've got a team ready for you." His gaze flicked to the medics and back to me, searching my face for truth. "Your parents?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I leaned in closer. "They don't get to decide this. You do, and I already have the paperwork to make it happen." The faintest smile tugged at his lips. Always did follow orders when they made sense. One of the medics crouched and said softly, "Sir, we'll keep you warm and secure. It's only a short ride." Grandpa nodded slowly, as if every movement cost him energy, but his dignity remained. Together, we helped him to his feet, sliding the blanket around his shoulders as though it were a cloak of honor. As we guided him toward the gurney, I heard my mother's voice break through again. "This is unnecessary. He's fine here." Her tone carried more desperation now than certainty. Morales answered firmly, "Ma'am, delaying care can have legal consequences. This transfer is proceeding." The words silenced her, but the fury in her eyes burned. My father stood stiff, his jaw clenched, powerless in his own living room. We eased Grandpa onto the gurney, every movement precise and respectful. The medics worked like clockwork, securing him with practiced hands. As we rolled him toward the front door, neighbors leaned closer, phones in hand, their faces etched with curiosity and quiet support. Grandpa adjusted his blanket, lifted his chin, and when the sunlight hit his face on the porch, he drew in a long, deep breath. "Feels good to breathe fresh air," he murmured, almost to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The words carried across the yard, cutting through the tension like a blade. For a moment, the scene shifted. It was no longer about paperwork or confrontation. It was about a man finally stepping out of the shadows he had been forced into. I looked at my parents as we passed. My father's face had gone pale. My mother's lips pressed so tightly they trembled. They didn't move, didn't speak. Around them, the neighbors' expressions told another story. Some nodded quietly, others whispered words I couldn't catch. But I could feel the tide of judgment turning against the people who had tried to hide him. The gurney wheels rattled softly as we moved him down the steps. One of the medics opened the ambulance doors, and together we lifted him inside. They checked his vitals, attached oxygen, and adjusted the blanket around his chest. I climbed in beside him, holding his hand while the doors closed behind us. Outside, I caught one last glimpse of my parents standing on the porch, powerless, while the whole neighborhood watched. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest ease. Grandpa was no longer trapped in that dim house. He was moving toward real care, toward hope. The fight wasn't over, but the hardest step had been taken. And as the ambulance pulled away, I knew he felt it too. His hand squeezed mine, weak but steady, carrying the quiet dignity of a man finally given back his right to live. The hospital team moved fast once we arrived. Grandpa was wheeled straight into a treatment room, where nurses clipped monitors to his chest and slid an oxygen cannula beneath his nose. Dr. Patel came in with a focused calm that only comes from years of seeing life and death turn on quick action. She examined him, ordered a chest X-ray, and within minutes, confirmed what I had feared. He had pneumonia and signs of fluid buildup in his lungs. Left untreated, it could have killed him. Her words landed like a hammer in the room. I felt my jaw tighten, but at the same time, a wave of relief washed over me. We had gotten him out just in time. She looked at me and said, "You did the right thing bringing him in. Any longer and this would have been far worse." I nodded, But the anger beneath the relief grew sharper. My parents had known he was sick. They had seen him waste away and still refused help. When I stepped into the waiting area, they were sitting side by side but angled away from each other, their faces stiff. My mother's arms were crossed, and my father stared at the floor. I stood in front of them, folder in hand. The doctors say he has pneumonia. They are treating him now. Do you understand what that means? He could have died in that chair while you told everyone he was resting. My mother started to answer, but another woman joined us before she could. She wore a blazer and carried a small notebook. She introduced herself as Miss Blank, Act 7D. Holloway, a veterans advocate the hospital had contacted. Her voice was calm but firm as she explained. Preventing a veteran from receiving medical care can be considered elder neglect. In this state, it carries serious consequences. My parents stiffened, and for the first time, I saw fear flash across their faces. I pressed forward. You knew I had legal authority. You knew Grandpa trusted me to make these decisions. And still, you shut me out. Why? What were you hoping to gain by keeping him locked in that house? My father muttered something about wanting to spare him stress, but I cut him off. This wasn't about sparing him. This was about control. You wanted him quiet, invisible, until it was too late for anyone to ask questions. The silence after my words was heavier than the ticking clock on the wall. My mother's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. Miss Holloway opened her notebook and said, "From this moment forward, all decisions go through the medical proxy. If there is any interference, this case can be escalated. Do you both understand?" My parents gave small, reluctant nods. They were cornered, and they knew it. I stood there for a long moment, watching the people who had raised me shrink in their chairs under the weight of their own choices. Justice wasn't complete yet, but it had started. The truth had been dragged out into the open, where no denial could hide it. And I promised myself that from this point on, they would never get the chance to bury it again. Saturday morning came bright and clear, the kind of sky that made every color sharper. The hospital courtyard had been swept, benches wiped down, and a fresh flag hung between two maples. I had spread the word quietly, and people had come. Veterans in uniform stood at attention. Neighbors gathered with folded arms and curious eyes. Even the pastor from the food pantry was there. At 10:58, I wheeled Grandpa out, his best jacket buttoned and his old army blanket folded neatly across his lap. Morales walked beside me, steadying the chair as if it were a mission. Grandpa looked frail, the oxygen line still trailing from his nose. But his chin was lifted with a dignity no illness could erase. When people saw him, they straightened, as if reminded they were in the presence of someone who had given more than most ever would. The chaplain began with short words about service and sacrifice, how illness does not erase worth, and how a community is measured by how it treats its elders. The crowd listened in silence, broken only by the flutter of the flag. When the chaplain stepped back, Morales took a single step forward and saluted. "On behalf of those who served with you and those who came after, we thank you." One by one, every veteran in the courtyard snapped to attention, boots striking the ground in unison. I turned toward my parents, who stood stiff at the edge of the crowd. My voice was low, but sharp enough to cut. "Step forward." My father hesitated, but finally moved. My mother followed, her jaw tight. When they stood before Grandpa, I looked at them both. "You are going to kneel." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but I didn't waver. Respect is not just words, it is action. My father went down first, his knee striking the stone with a hollow thud. My mother froze, scanning the eyes around her, but then lowered herself slowly, carefully, and deliberately. Grandpa watched them with a steady gaze, his expression unreadable until he finally nodded once. "That's better," he said, voice rough, but sure. For a moment, the courtyard was silent, as if the air itself held still. Then Morales barked, D present arms, and every veteran saluted again, their hands sharp against the Sunday. My parents remained kneeling, their heads bowed, while the salute ended around them. The image was seared into the moment, impossible to forget. When the ceremony closed, people came to shake Grandpa's hand, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet words of thanks. High school kids brought him a card they had all signed. My parents lingered at the edge, stripped of control, their defiance melted into silence. I wheeled Grandpa back toward the hospital doors. He was tired, but a small smile touched his lips. "You pulled it off," he whispered. I squeezed his hand. "Not for me, for you." And so, they'll never forget. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize the real battle was never about paperwork or even medicine. It was about refusing to let silence and control bury the truth. My parents thought they could decide Aloe. That comfort meant keeping him hidden until there was nothing left to fight for. They were wrong. Justice is not always about courts or judges. Sometimes it happens in front yards, in hospital rooms, or in small gardens where people gather and bear witness. It is the moment when hiding is no longer possible, when the truth stands in the open and demands to be acknowledged. That is what we created that day for my grandfather, a moment that no one in our community will ever forget. I know not every family battle looks like mine, but almost everyone will face a moment when someone they love is vulnerable, and others try to decide what is best without really listening. In that moment, you have a choice. You can step back and let it happen, or you can step forward and defend the dignity of the person who once stood for you. My grandfather taught me that courage is not just about fighting when people are watching. It is about doing the right thing even when it costs you, even when it puts you against your own blood. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. When your turn comes, stand for the people who once stood for you. Do it loud if you must, quiet if you can, but do it in a way they will never forget, because love is not a word. Love is showing up,